Now imagine this. You're home alone and you hear a knock on your door. And when you open up the door, there's a man standing there on your porch with his family smiling politely. And he goes and tells you, "Hey, I used to live here. Is it okay if we take a quick tour around my old house for nostalgic sake?" A little weird, sure, but harmless, right? You hesitate for a moment, then decide, sure, and let them in. And then that moment, everything changes. Now, welcome to Already Overbooked. My name's Josh, and today we're going to be going through and talking about We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer. This is a novel started as a viral subreddit story before becoming one of the most chilling psychological thrillers in recent memory. Now, it's a slow burn, mind bending horror novel that makes you question reality, memory, and even your own instincts. If you love books that play with your perception and leave you with more questions and answers, stick around because this one is going to be deeply unsettling. So let's go through and start with the plot. The story revolves around Eve and her partner Charlie, who are a young couple who specialize in house flipping, where they go through and purchase old homes, renovate them, and then sell them for a profit. Their latest project is a historical home in the Pacific Northwest. This house has an eerie past and a weird atmosphere that Eve can't quite place. One evening, while Charlie is away, Eve hears an unexpected knock on the door. When she opens it, she finds a man who his name is Thomas standing there with his family, a wife and their children. He explains that he used to grow up in this house and he asked if they could take a quick look around for nostalgic sake. At first, Eve is very hesitant. After all, it's odd, but something about Thomas's demeanor is oddly persuasive, and against her better judgment, she agrees to let them inside for just a quick 15-minute tour around the house. What starts as a innocent visit takes a really disturbing turn. The family lingers longer than expected. Their behavior suddenly starts to shift from polite to uncomfortably familiar. They don't just look around, they begin making themselves at home in a way that feels increasingly intrusive. Thomas reminisces about his time in the home, but his memories seem a little bit off as he recalls certain things that change that doesn't really make a lot of sense to him or any of the other characters in the book. The children start roaming around freely and things start getting weirder, which is causing the Thomas and his family to stay longer than expected. As the hours stretch on, Eve starts feeling really trapped in her own home. The sense of unease starts growing with every passing minute. She tries to remain polite, but every attempt to guide them towards the exit is met with subtle resistance, a misplaced comment, an unspoken understanding that they aren't ready to leave. The tension builds as small, unexpected events start to happen. Doors start opening, familiar objects start moving. It just starts getting very weird inside of this house, and Eve needs to go through and try to figure out how to get these people out of her house, but also understand what is actually happening in the house. So let's go through and jump to now the characters. We have Eve, who is really the central protagonist. And what makes her really compelling is how relatable she feels. She's not reckless. Her choices really make sense within the social expectations. But the core of Eve's personality is her inherent politeness, which becomes her biggest vulnerability because Thomas and his family really starts taking advantage of Eve's kindness and really pushing the boundaries to allow them to stay longer and longer. Her inner monologue is has a lot of dry humor and self-awareness, making her feel like a grounded character, someone that you can really relate to and understand. She recognized that something is off early on, but rather than immediately reacting, She rationalizes her discomfort and really starts blaming herself rather than what's actually happening. This makes her experience even more unnerving as we, the readers, are going to start seeing a lot of red flags stacking up. And it's small red flags, small flag here, small flag here, and things start being weird. And we really are rooting for Eve to see these red flags to really take control of what's going on throughout the story. So, throughout the novel, Eve is really forced to balance logic and her own paranoia. She keeps trying to convince herself that nothing is actually wrong, that maybe she's just overreacting until it becomes undeniably clear that something is deeply, really deeply wrong. So the next character is Charlie. Charlie is Eve's girlfriend, and Charlie is assertive. Charlie is patient, skeptical, and really is Eve's polar opposite. She's confident, she's assured, uh, which is why Eve is so reliant on Charlie. When Eve starts to feel panic and anxiety, Charlie is there to calm her down through comfort and logical explanations. Now we're going to move on to Thomas. Thomas is uniquely dynamic character. From the moment he arrives at Eve's door, he emits a quiet but persistent presence that makes him impossible to dismiss. Thomas isn't outright menacing, at least at first. In fact, his charm is what makes him so unsettling. He speaks calmly, politely, making small talk and reminiscing about the house in a way that feels harmless on the surface. But as time goes on, his demeanor starts becoming increasingly unsettling. He deflects questions in a way that keeps Eve off balance, never directly lying to Eve, but also never completely being honest. He never raises his voice or makes any kind of direct threats, but his calm presence makes it feel like Eve is really losing control one conversation at a time. And the rest of Thomas's family, there's very familiar yet off about each member of the family, which makes it very unnerving and disconnecting with these characters. So now let's move along to the writing style of Marcus Kliewer. It is deeply atmospheric. It relies a lot on slow burn, build up of tension rather than traditional horror tropes like jump scares or just violence that just jumps out of the pages. The the novel really thrives on ever present sense of unease where the horror isn't always obvious, but it's there lingering in the background, creeping into the edges of your perception. Marcus structures the novel in a way that mimics psychological unraveling of the protagonist. The pacing is measured, it's deliberate, making every small unsettling moment feel like another brick is growing on a big wall of paranoia. And the book doesn't immediately reveal its horrors. Instead, it feeds you with breadcrumbs, making you question reality alongside with the protagonist. The novel really begins with a quiet, almost mundane setup, but slowly builds tension with every passing page instead of just throwing you into the horror immediately. Marcus really crafts a slow, suffocating atmosphere, forcing you to sit in discomfort for an extended period of time. So, jumping into the themes and tones of We Used to Live Here, it is layered with thematic depth, which makes it more than just simply, like I mentioned earlier, a horror, just more simply than a horror novel. um, there is one core theme that I notice in this book is the unrelatability of perception. You and the characters will question, is Eve experiencing a horrific event, or is her mind deceiving her? This self doubt really becomes a psychological prison, making Eve hesitate before taking any type of action. It's a terrifying, real experience many people can go through and relate to in the moment of any kind of stress or exhaustion. And in the book, it uses it to make the horror feel really grounded and deeply personal. The tone shifts from grounded psychological horror to something almost dread like as Eve's mental state starts to deteriorate. And the writing style reflects this with increasingly pragmatic thoughts and unreliable narration, pulling you deeper and deeper into Eve's paranoia. So, with that being said, there's going to be some pros and cons. Some pros that I've went through and noticed in We Used to Live Here has a really strong quality. Its ability to go through and sustain an almost unbearing level of tension throughout the narration. I really enjoyed the subtlety of the higher stakes that the book was putting on to the reader. So the tension was very well done. The pacing felt very tight, and it helped move the plot without unnecessary detours, ensuring the suspense never lost momentum. I felt the characters were relatably well done. There was a lot of traits that you can go through and understand. Definitely as Eve, who is like an anxious, second guessing person. I felt her character was very, very well done, while Charlie was very grounded in the presence of the story and tried to look at the world more as um, realistic, while Eve was more introspective with her thoughts and trying to go through and deal with her own nervousness and unsettling she's felt in the past. And then I feel like they do the horror element very well. There is a lot of second guessing, a lot of you're trying to go through and figure out what's going on. So I felt the horror elements from a psychological perspective was done very, very well in this book. Now, of course, there's always going to be some cons. So some readers may find the ending unsatisfying. So, without spoiling what happens at the ending, there's no concrete answer. So, if you're looking for a very clear, hey, this is what happens, this is the end of the story, the end, it doesn't really do that. It's very open ended. So, if you're into open ended endings, then you will definitely go through and enjoy this. But if you're not a fan of that, you might find this frustrating. So, jumping into my final thoughts. We Used to Live Here is one of those books that gets under your skin and then stays there. It's not about the jump scares, the gore, the over the top horror. Instead, it's a slow burning psychological nightmare that makes you go through and question your memories, your reality, and the terrifying possibilities that your home, the place you live, is not safe. Marcus's writing shines really in an atmospheric way. His tension capability, making every moment feel increasingly claustrophobic, is very well done. With that being said, this book is not going to be for everybody. Again, if you prefer fast paced horror with clear answers and a definitive conclusion, We Used to Live Here might make you feel frustrated. The novel does lean into the ambiguity and the psychological unraveling, making it perfect pick for readers who enjoy stories that blur the line between horror and unreliable narration. So for me, this book was a solid 8 out of 10. It was a great book that kept me thinking long after I went through and finished it, and the slow burn of dread is executed masterfully. So if you're a fan of like creep and paranoia, unreliable reality, and a story that feels like you're slowly losing control, this is an absolutely worth your time. So I do have a go through and have a question for you. Would you let a stranger into your home if they claim they used to live in your house, or are you slam the door and lock in every window? Let me know down in the comments. And of course, I appreciate you watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe. You know what to do. Until I see you in the next one.